Pam, I've got to ask you a trivial question at the beginning. Those 4 names got me. I know Vi is short for Violet, but the others sounded so far out that I thought for a moment I was going to meet very far out women. Not true. But
no, I think Fish was the name of a girl I knew at school, and therefore I had an affection for it. There is a habit when you are a young woman, a very young woman, to change your name when you're not sure what your identity is. Duza was the name of a girl who was living in the house when I was writing the play and who happened to come in one day and said, put me in. And I liked her name, so I used that name. And I think I just like names.
Unusual ones, difficult ones for me to remember, I might say. There's a statement in the play which I thought was very surprising. The only things that matter are the last 50 years in physics and the next 50 years in biology.
Yes, this is said by Stas, who is a woman who wants to become a marine biologist and who is concerned not with the why but the how. There aren't many women in science, and Rosie Franklin, who was one, didn't get a Nobel Prize. Some of us feel strongly about that. Stas wants to be a scientist, and she believes in the scientific method. There's so much emphasis on politics in the press, on television. It's in the forefront of our thinking now, when in fact very much of our health at the moment is because we cleaned our water 50 years ago. People don't die of TB as they did when I was a child. I lost an uncle in 6 months at the age of 30 with galloping consumption. But we had streptomycin in 1941. And these things, I think in the hindsight of history, are seen to be what has actually changed the nature of society. And I do in fact think that the last 50 years of physics, which meant the splitting of the atom, if you think of the consequences of that in itself, it actually entered as a political consequence, though it was never intended to be so. And I also think now that we know the secret of the cell, so that we can in fact create human beings with wings if we so wish. I mean, it's a devastating thought. We can also get rid of disease, genetic disease.
You're not actually saying that genetic engineering is a good idea, are you?
I think properly controlled, yes, that it is. I speak with feeling because I have a mongoloid child. And I think that anything that makes people fitter and healthier and more able to lead a fulfilled life has to be good, with the proper restrictions, of course.
Yes, control, very strong control over it. Yes. You've mentioned your Mongol child, so may I pursue that for a moment? It must be, without any doubt, difficult. I mean, are there any ways that you've got which might help other people bringing up a Mongol child?
It is very difficult. 70% of marriages with handicapped children break up. That's a known statistic. The shock is one that I think parents never overcome. The fact that you've produced a damaged child, however inadvertently, damages you.
You mean you really can't sort of think to yourself, really this is such an accident, it's nothing that I'm personally responsible for?
Not when you see the child every day. And in my case, I chose to have a child at 40 and I was taking a known risk. I was unlucky. And I was very unlucky because amniocentesis began about 2 years afterwards. Nowadays, older women can have a tube that's put into the fluid, and the child can be aborted. So I think fairly soon we shall have a system whereby this can be discerned from blood tests and we won't have any more Mongol children, and this has to be a good thing. On the other hand, I did choose to keep my child. There was no question. I couldn't give her up. I'm a deviant. I would have had 10 children, I think, by nature. It's utterly impossible to say to other people whether they should keep a Mongoloid child or not. I'm inclined to believe that a young couple in their 20s who have a Mongoloid child and who happen, let's say, to live in a high-rise and who haven't got a lot of money, I think their chances are pretty slim. There's also the problem of other children. We had to send my third child away to school because it was affecting his life. The care that we had to give to the fourth child was so great just to rear her. It is a terrible tragedy. There's only other parents can really understand.
Tell me this then, what do you mean when you say that they can be taken away? You mean that there is a choice, is there a choice given to you by someone?
Mavis, you know, some parents won't take them away from hospital. Some doctors advise you to have the children put away, and they're not always wrong. It sounds terribly cruel to institutionalise a child, but of course some children are so mongoloid that they can't cope at all on their own, and they do need to be in an institution. On the other hand, we do know, there was a piece in the Times yesterday, that mentally handicapped people can do a great deal more for themselves if we can train them from the age of 2 when their mind is rapidly advancing. And we've put a lot into Lala. I mean, she wears pretty clothes, she comes about with us, it's often inconvenient. They're not convenient people to have about with you, believe me. I mean, if she takes dislike to someone on the street, she'll give them a shove, you know. Well, if it happens to be an old lady, she could break a leg, you know. But on the other hand, there have been great rewards, great rewards.
Somebody told me that they feel absolutely terribly angry sometimes when they take their child out and it's laughed at.
Yes, it happens a lot, I'm afraid. You see, people do look, I do myself, you look at something that's odd, you can't help it. And this happens to Lala all the time. People double take. And she reacts very nastily because Mongol.
So she must know then?
Well, she knows that there's something different. I mean, she'll say as a term of abuse either, "Oh, you're a Mongol," or she'll say, "You're normal." I mean, they have lovely language because they don't suppress anything, you see. We can learn a lot about normal children who suppress their instincts by the age of 3 from Mongol children who don't. We learn the truth. If you're nasty with them or you try to punish them, they become very bad inside, which says a lot about the way we punish people in society.
Do you have a reaction to people on the road who...
Oh yes, I'm afraid I have taken on some of Lala's anarchism. And when people persist in poking, whispering, staring, Lala usually puts her tongue out, and occasionally so do I.
Jolly good, I think, too.
I don't know.
Let me go back, if I may, to you. You have felt that the theatre has been short of parts for women. I mean, real parts for women.
Yes, I think so. I feel that very strongly. I think the history of women has, in the main, as we know, been written by men, often sublimely, if you think of Ibsen. But I think it's time that we wrote our own history, particularly now that we've chemically mutated ourselves so that we have to existentially choose whether to have children or not, and now that we're living so much longer, so that we must have another function and purpose after our children are reared. So women now have to look at themselves in a way that hasn't been possible until very few years ago, certainly in my lifetime. I know the suffragettes and people worked in the past for freedoms for women, but women were still so bound by the dangers of childbirth alone. If you think of the great writers in the 19th century, Jane Austen, the Brontes, George Eliot, how many children did they have? They had no children.
You've had 4 children, and you've got 2 older ones who actually still seem to be sticking around with you. This is a kind of little area of my life at the moment that I'm feeling very tentative and sensitive about. Because I think that there's a moment of truth comes when suddenly those children don't seem to need you quite as much. They do, but they're going to be themselves and away from you.
And you have to kick them away, as it were, like a cat or a fox does. I know, it's painful. I think it has to happen to all women who've put a great deal of themselves into the rearing of their children. There comes a moment when you are a queen who's lost her country. You have to abdicate, and it's painful. I also think it's very painful for men in relation to their sons. I think it can be quite traumatic. With my own children, my oldest son got off on his own very early. It was the 60s, remember, the dropout time. He ran a magazine, he did a lot of things. I like to think that because we had such a loose rein, and in a funny way, because I'd had a rather heavy childhood, when they were having their adolescence, I was, as it were, coming out. I'd come to London and I wanted to write in the theatre. And in a funny way, because the 60s were a bit hilarious, we were all beginning at the same time, and in a way I joined them. I'm not sure whether that was right or not, but I did find that my own friends were getting awfully stuffy. I couldn't talk to them anymore, you know. I mean, you know, they're all getting to be managers and things. And so the children do come back. And one of my daughter's at agricultural college. She's dealing with pigs and things, which is her heart's desire. So she is away in Bedfordshire a lot of the time. But I do see a good deal of them. I think it's the nature. We're a very family, so were my people. I think it probably varies from family to family. Families aren't fashionable, of course, now, anything but.
No, but I think if you are, there must be a transition, I think, between, say, your feeling as a mother to the son or the daughter, right? That's, they accept you, mother,
yes,
daughter, son. They've got to start to like you as a person, as a friend, haven't they? And that, I think, has been the difficulty sometimes. If parents have kept themselves as very much the parent figure.
Yes,
and
I
they've
agree.
never made that transition to becoming a friend and a person.
Right. I think the first thing is when you see your children begin to look at you with a critical look, with distaste. They find you coarse.
That's right.
Old blotting paper. They're so purist, you know, when they're newly fledged. And you're all wrong, of course, and you are all wrong because you're going down and they're coming up. You know, it's talk about continuous revolution. It didn't take Mao or Trotsky. It just takes generations to do it. And I think, in a funny way, it's like when the 2-year-old suddenly starts to call himself I instead of me, and he's separating himself from his mother. When your children start to call you by your Christian name instead of mum and dad, I think there's something quite symbolic about that.
But I do.
And if they never do,
yes, you're in for it. I think you kind of often have to almost warn people, though, because I know I felt, well, I had a job when my children, you know, after they'd gone to school, and yet I can still feel a slight despair that I'm not going to be wanted, not in the same way. And I don't think people warn you enough about that, do you? Or have I?
Yes, I think I agree. It's like the way that people never warn you about postnatal depression after you've had the child.
Or even child pain.
Or even the pain of childbirth, yes. There's a great collusion of silence about that. I think amongst women we don't want to alarm our younger sisters, but therefore we don't have as much done for us as we might. But I do agree with you, and I suppose it's up to us as women to understand that this is going to happen. I mean, for example, where you're concerned, maybe you have a career, a very exciting one. I think for a lot of women who perhaps don't have anything to turn to, it can be tragedy.
It must be isolation, I would have thought, you know, I think.
It may be going, because more than 60% of women now work through necessity, married women. Certainly when I came in, it wasn't at all fashionable. It was déclassé. It was wrong for a woman to work and, as it were, neglect her children. Then they did a big survey in Leicester, I think, and found out that way back in the 50s, they wanted to show that women should stay with their young children, which to some extent I agree with. And they found that the children of the women who worked, who were a fairly selected sample, were in fact brighter and stronger, and I think perhaps it was because it was a selected sample. But there's no reason why we shouldn't work during our children's childhood, so long as there's love and affection and stability.
You didn't, though, funnily enough, did you? I mean, you didn't actually write much, because were we right when we said at the beginning of the programme that you didn't start seriously writing until you were in your 40s? Not really, no.
I think after the war, you know, those of us who'd grown up in the 30s, we wanted homes and we wanted consumer goods, like mad we did. I'd never had new clothes, you know, until I joined up and had that Wren's uniform.
Well, you were in the Wren's, were you? I can't imagine that quite.
People look good in Belmonts, I tell you. But, you know, we did want those things, and we wanted domesticity, you know, and then the 50s were a bit grey, and we were all so hard up. Also, I'd come from the working class, and although I got a university degree as an ex-service woman, I didn't believe. I still had the ethos of the working class, and also as a woman. I mean, I had interesting friends, some of whom were in the theatre, but I never spoke up. Somehow I made the tea, I don't know. And it took a long time, and it was really depression. When I gave up work after the second child, I was so depressed, too arrogant to realise that that was what I was suffering.
Yes, one never likes to admit that you're depressed.
No, it happens to other people,
That's right.
you see, not to oneself.
Because there's a kind of puritanism in oneself to say this
That's right. Yes, you see, one's better than that. You know, you've read all about it, therefore it doesn't happen to you. And I realise now that I was very depressed for a long time because it just wasn't enough to be sat in a box. I'd come from the country where I knew everybody in town, and to be living in Wandsworth Putney, knowing no one, and indolent physically by nature, so not of the nature to get out, you know. I felt that the children needed me. That's why I stayed with it. But that's when I started to write.
But secretly,
yes,
quietly,
yes,
what? Ashamed to be writing?
It, yes, really. I didn't show it to people. I didn't think it could be good enough.
Because you see, you've got the sort of rather charming, if I might say so,
Nice.
sort of shyness about you that I think sometimes it is in a writer. But a writer is really saying something quite aggressive in a way, and quite confident. They're saying, you listen to me, my point of view.
Yes, yes.
And it's quite frightening,
yes,
I
it
think,
is. It's
to
a very
put it down
arrogant
on,
act.
isn't
yes.
it?
I was very shy as a child. All photographs of me are shown with my head down, you know. And I think shyness is the other side of arrogance. I think I was arrogant because I was very, very bright at school. Thank God, because we all need something to get us through. And I was fat and cross-eyed, so that didn't help. It is a very arrogant act to go into a room and sit down and write something and then tell people to shut up and listen for perhaps 2 hours at a time. And the only way that you can justify it is if, I think, the main reason is that you are obsessed. You can no more stop writing than you can stop peeing. It's your nature. I'm in love with words. I'm half Welsh.
Explains it.
Says
I
everything.
knew there was something. Of course, that's it.
And the other thing is that you have to have an attitude of humility. There's no chance of your having anything else if you try to be a writer, because you can never satisfy yourself. If something is a success, you see only the faults. It's a treadmill, really. It's, at the same time, it's the best way of not being bored. I was bored, you see, and it's become such an obsession that I find there is nothing else that will do for me but to go into a room and do exciting things with words.
You're still doing exciting things with words, though, thank goodness, aren't you? Because what's your latest play going to be?
Well, I've actually just finished yesterday, funnily enough, a play about Passionaria, the woman who has just gone back to Spain. I just think she's a remarkable woman, and also would make a jolly fine part for a woman. But I also wrote last year Queen Christina, a play about Queen Christina of Sweden, and that's going on at the other place in Stratford. And in fact, we start rehearsals next week with Sheila Allen, who is going to play Queen Christina.
She's complicated because she was brought up as a boy. Is that, have I got that right?
Yes, she was brought up as a man on her father's instructions. He was killed in battle in the 30 Years' War when she was 6, and he left instructions for her, his only surviving child, to be brought up entirely as a man, to hunt and shoot, to speak languages, to learn diplomacy, to be taken away from the women, and to be brought up as a man in order to become, as it were, a king. So they put the crown on her head, and then they said, now you must marry and breed, because we need an heir. And she said, well, I can't, I'm a fella. And it got rather complicated.
Are you happy about women in the world at the moment? Fairly happy about women in the world at the moment, Pam? Has to be a short answer, I'm afraid.
Yes. No, not really, any more than men. I'm terrified that women will take the path that men will take, to be machine minders, and I think our sexuality is very much in doubt at the moment. I think we have to discover who we are and how we are going to contribute, as well as to struggle to be allowed to contribute. I think we have to make radical changes in society and recreate community. Ecologically, we have to anyway, fortunately.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me in this.